Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Development Diaries. This is a show where we interview leaders, innovators, change makers, movers and shakers from across the real estate development sector, learning about their career journeys, proudest moments, lessons learned along the way, and advice to their younger you. We also find out what excites them most about the real estate sector right now. I'm your host, John Guest, founder of Henry James Search and the Rebels Community, a group of good humans in real estate who come together to move the industry forward and challenge the status quo. On this episode of Development Diaries, I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Hunt, co-founder of V7. V7 are an asset and development management company specialising in the transformation and decarbonisation of buildings across the workspace, industrial and living sectors, with offices in London and Manchester. Chris, it's a sunny Tuesday morning in the summer holidays. Thanks for joining us today. How are you keeping?
No problem, John. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, very well. Enjoying the summer.
Yeah, it's been good so far. Although most of my middle-aged friends are now asking for rain. So we're never happy in this country, are we?
The lawn's a bit brown, so yeah, we can do something.
Yes, could be worse. So we like to start on Development Diaries by going back a few years to the beginning of your career. Could you share with us and the listeners a little bit more about how you ended up in the wonderful world of real estate? Was it written in the stars, or were there a few sliding doors moments along the way?
Yeah, I mean, my mum and dad were both in real estate. My dad was an architect, mainly in the office sector, and my mum was a lawyer in the residential sector. So I guess it was probably in my DNA. But the thing that really got me going on the general principle of real estate was that I lived in Bristol. I was in a career, funny enough, I was a recruitment consultant in the IT industry just after uni. Didn't like it. Loved watching Sarah Beanie and all of these real estate location TV programs. And I thought that looked really good fun. So the initial entry to the market was me writing my dad a business plan to say I would like to buy a house and turn it into some flats because that looked like there was some margin in it. And I wrote him the plan and he lent me £22,000. And I put a deposit down on a house in a place called Windmill Hill in Bristol, converted it into 3 flats, essentially using bank money. Paid the bank back, paid my dad back, sold the flats, and used the profit to go back to uni and did real estate masters in real estate. And that gave me the bug. Even though it was resi, I still felt like I loved the transformation to take this thing from one existence to another, and obviously make profit at the end of it. So that was what lit the fire, I guess.
And looking back, I mean, you made that sound completely normal. Like to have that entrepreneurial flair or risk appetite to go and do something like that. Where do you think that came from? Was it an idea that someone gave to you, or did you just come up with it one day?
I think it was because I was no good at recruitment at all. I talked way too much and didn't do any kind of deals. But I wanted something tangible. I could have easily been a builder. I think I just love taking something and transforming it and having that pride at the end of it to show what you've done for all your hard work. And so it was a bit unusual. None of my friends were doing it, but with my dad being an architect, he obviously did the plans for me. So that was a lot of help. My mum was on the legal side. She covered me from that side. So I knew that I was well protected. I worked with an amazing Bristolian builder who had the broadest Bristol accent you've ever known, but treated me really well, and I treated him very well. And it was just interesting from start to finish, which is essentially what we do now, just on a bigger scale.
Yeah, quite right. Creating places, leaving them in a better place. Yeah, it's funny how that's kind of seed has been sown. And did you feel like doing that experience and then going back or in sync with your studies, did that kind of help when you were studying, like having some real world experience to apply both ways? How did that impact?
Yeah, I mean, I did a commercial course, so it was less around residential development, but the principles are the same. It was, I mean, in in simple terms, it's buy it for 5 mil, spend 5 mil on it, you're in for 10, get out at 15, and you've done a great job. It was
Buy,
no
refurbish,
difference.
refinance.
Yeah, and I mean, the course was fantastic. I did a master's in real estate at UWE, which I guess brought a bit of structure and a bit of explanation around what happens in the market and all the different facets. And it was a really good grounding. So yes, I'm sure that the flats helped, but I reckon that was the firelighter, and then it just got more and more interesting from there. Mainly because of the course.
Yeah, and having the people that could, I guess, sounds like with your parents back you, but keep you safe in equal measure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're talking in grown-up language, then my downside was protected somewhat because I had some good non-execs behind me.
Yeah.
But it didn't feel like that at the time. Just thought I didn't really see the risk, I guess, because I was naive. But that was probably a huge sort of selling point at the time.
100%. I started my first business at 19 while living at home. There wasn't much risk really, other than being a bit hungry, but I could go and steal some snacks from my parents' fridge instead. So therefore there was no risk. So how did your career progress from there? That was kind of the pivot into it, lit the fire. The masters came next. Could you talk us through kind of how that developed and ended up where you are today?
Yeah. So in 2003, I left UWE and applied to every single consultancy you can imagine to join their grad scheme, and obviously got rejected from 99% of them. I don't think I got an interview from any of the big houses whatsoever apart from Cushman Wakefield. And at the time, Cushman's were looking for people with slightly different backgrounds. So I was slightly older. I'd already been in sales and recruitment. And so I think that they were just looking to put people with certain skill sets in certain locations rather than have a sort of a generic filtering process on their recruitment. So, which was great for me because my skills, I guess, are people and communication and, building relationships. And I think Cushman Wakefield saw me as a leasing agent or an investment agent and didn't try to pigeonhole me in terms of valuation or property management or something that's more technical, I guess. So ended up going through a few rounds of interviews and getting onto the grad scheme at Cushman's in Portman Square. An unbelievable couple of years of being on the grad scheme with a load of like-minded people, lots of entrepreneurial flair in there, lots of very well-known sons of very well-known people in the property industry, as you would expect. But we started in 2005. I started in the leasing team, national office leasing team. So I spent a lot of time in the car, traveling all over the UK, showing buildings off to people, which I loved. And then I moved in from there into the Thames Valley leasing team, where I sat out in Stockley Park for a number of years under the guidance of Charles Dady, who's a fantastic guy. And I loved it. I loved showing off buildings. I loved interacting with people. I loved the sales element of it. I loved the negotiation when you got into heads of term stage. And I thought that would be my place forever, to be honest. I thought I'd found my niche. And whilst I never stopped enjoying it, I guess after a little while, I started to realize that leasing, whilst you do have input in parts of the development phase to help shape the product, the main drawback for me on leasing was the fact that it's only a moment in time. So you only really get to do your work when it's either very near to completion of PC or it's finished. It's a finished product and you're letting a newly finished building. And I was sort of a little bit curious on what happens before and after that stage. So I thought the best transition for me would be to go to an investment team where I'd get exposure to buying and selling, which obviously is the beginning and the end of the life cycle. And so I was sat around a dinner table with my dad, And my dad said to me, you should draw a plan, draw a line chart on where your career is going to go. And he interrogated me for quite a long time. And I've still got it. I drew a chart which said, this is where I am now in the leasing team. I'm going to request a transfer into the investment team. Then I'll have the leasing and investment either end. But what I won't have is the asset and development management in between. So the doing, the transformation bit. So I need to go and get exposure to that. So I'll become an asset manager somewhere in a few years' time. And then once I've got exposure to the whole life cycle, I reckon I should do this myself and be in charge of the entire life cycle. I can buy something, underwrite it, do the transformation, lease it and sell it. And so I drew this chart, and it sounds super geeky now, but it was up on the fridge, and it gave me something to aim for. And I'm pretty proud to say it almost worked out to I didn't have days, but it worked out to exactly what I'd planned within the sort of same timeframes. So I went to the investment team at Cushman's, worked with James Leach and some other big hitters like Peter Winfield, etc. It was amazing. We bought and sold lots of office and industrial kit. The market was pretty good, so there was a lot of appetite and a lot of deals being done back in those days, much more than there is now. And got exposure to really understanding what drives value, because we're obviously trying to drive value out of these buildings. And if there's something that detracts value, then it's obviously interesting to understand and see if we can fix that before it sells. So I guess it wasn't an out-and-out brokerage position. It was more of a consultancy. This is what we think you need to do prior to selling to maximize the value, and then you sell. And that was really interesting to me. So tick that box, and also loved it because it's similar to leasing in the fact that you get exposure to people, buildings, deals, negotiation. And then after a few years there, I decided, right, now is the time. My chart is telling me it's time to sort of learn the middle bit. And I was lucky enough to land a job at Legal in General, working for their PAFE fund, with a fund manager called Matt Jarvis, who's there. He's been there for a long time, and he runs the fund amazingly. It was fascinating. I was responsible for a lot of buildings. We also bought and sold a lot of buildings, and I really got exposure to how a balanced fund approaches life and investment. And I also got exposure to how to drive value from assets. And I was looking after heavily multi-let industrial estates, big single-let office buildings in the city. I was even looking after some shopping centres. But what I loved is the ability to make a difference in the value. And that was the sort of icing on the cake for me, because I then felt complete. I felt like entry is investment. Underwriting and business planning was an annual thing at Legal in General. Delivery of business plan was fantastic because that's where we really drove the value. CapEx plays and lots of re-gears and leasing and marketing. And then once we'd driven the value and it was stabilized, we either held it as an income play or we sold it. So it really was full cradle to grave. And that was the background before the big jump into being self-employed.
It's always good to hear someone that has a plan. And part of the reason we started this podcast was to share some of those life lessons that sounds like you had in abundance, actually. Just listening to you speak, certainly, whether it felt like it at the time, but being encouraged to actually write things down, make a plan, be that a business plan for your first project or a plan for your career, sticking it on your fridge where it's visual. And I guess, I think you said it doesn't sound that exciting, but actually one of the things that people miss sometimes when they set goals is accountability. So they keep them to themselves, whereas actually, when you break cover and share them with people, then you probably feel a bit more pressure to make them happen. So
I totally agree. My business partners will attest to this, that I absolutely love a plan. I write business plans we have an office business, an industrial business, and a living business. We write annual business plans for each. We've got a marketing plan for how to deploy our marketing and sales. So yeah, unless it's written down, I find it can easily get brushed over. But if it's there in writing, it gives accountability to each person. Everyone's got responsibility. You can look at each other and say, why no? Why has this not happened? And it makes stuff happen.
And a bit like most developments, it's never a straight line, is it? It's never exactly how you plan for it to play out. There's speed bumps, there's changes along the way, but at least you can self-correct and rewrite. And as you say, it becomes more about a system and a process than it does about someone's emotions.
Yeah, well, you'd never start a big central London office refurb without a plan and an underwrite.
You hope not. So have you ever thought, Chris, I know you touched on your early success in recruitment, or getting out of it as quickly as possible. It sounds like you actually enjoyed quite a lot of what the role is. Maybe you're in the wrong business or the wrong sector. Ironically, my dad was an architect as well, so kind of grew up around property. And when I then married the two, which was some of the similarities to you, love of meeting people, putting things together, making things happen, coming up with a plan, and then the tangible element of seeing buildings get built by these people, clearly one step removed compared to you. Have you ever thought about what you would have been instead if you didn't forge a career in what you're doing now or recruitment?
Oh, outside of real estate?
Yes.
Oh, I would be a house DJ.
Okay. Nice.
I'm ever so obsessed with music, basically, and house music, and a bit of drum and bass. But I would, if I had my go again, I would have got into mixing and DJing a lot earlier than I have. But I just love the energy that it brings and it bringing people together, which is essentially no different to what we're doing with real estate. But yeah, it would be something
creating feelings and collectives and atmosphere. Yeah,
yeah,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly. It's no different to how we consider buildings and how we want people to feel when they come into buildings. I mean, ideally, if people are dancing through our front doors, that's awesome.
Well, David Partridge in episode 1 said that he would, if he wasn't in real estate, he would have opened a nightclub in Ibiza. So
well, maybe we should maybe go into business together.
Here we go. When that's an option, we'll get that happening.
You can have a sidearm in Ibiza company formation.
100%. So talked a bit about your career, making a plan, going from agency to investment, then to asset management, starting to put the building blocks together of the different parts, thinking, as you said yourself, one day I could do this myself. How early in your career was that in your mind to start your own business, and what were the parts kind of led to that? And I guess what was the tipping point where you thought, you know what, now's the time?
I think it was always in my DNA. I mean, my mum was a one-man band lawyer, then started to recruit some people, ended up having a business by sort of accident, and then it got bought by a larger legal firm. She then grew that and it got bought by another large legal firm. And my dad was a serial entrepreneur, started a number of architecture practices, and again got bought out. So I think that was just part of the norm. I would just see my mum and dad working from home or building businesses, and then suddenly the business name changes and becomes something different because they've been purchased or merged. So I think it was probably seen as quite a normal thing, rather than something totally alien. But the real driver for me was a bit like how we approach schemes, as in we love the transformation and taking something that's mismanaged or unloved and turning it around into something that's stabilized, income producing. It's that transformation that really drives us. Starting a business felt like that. It felt like I can start something from scratch, I can build something, and I can at one point exit further down the line. And that is the driver. The thing that I love the most working at V7 is is building the business and running the business. I've sort of stepped away a little bit from day-to-day project work, but my main role is to run the business and focus on growth strategies, which is no different to how we approach scheme. And then to answer your question on how it all started, I was at Legal in General, which I was loving. I mean, quite frankly, I could have stayed there forever because it was interesting, really great brand, lots of money to spend on these buildings. It was an entrepreneurial house compared to some of the sleepy institutions. But the real catalyst for me was that as part of a growing portfolio, we were exposed to a huge number of assets. And I think I was responsible for a lot, and probably too many to really make a big difference and put my stamp on it. And so whilst I was enjoying it, I don't feel like I really got the ability to spend a huge amount of time on a single asset to drive every last piece of value and squeeze every pip. So we decided, well, instead of spreading ourselves thinly over a very large portfolio, myself and my business partner, Zach Beasy, decided, we got introduced in a pub. We sat there and talked at each other for about 3 hours each. And we ended up talking exactly in alignment. And that was, what really needs to happen in real estate is you need the time, the expertise, the attention to detail to spend on these assets so that you can leave no stone unturned. And if you can credibly say, we have sweat this asset as hard as we can, there is nothing left. There's nothing left to do. When you walk around, you will not find a wall that needs painting or a tenant that needs re-gearing. Then we think that that is the right way to approach real estate. So we literally agreed in the pub there and then that we would set up an asset and development management platform. And back then, it was entirely focused on existing owners. So essentially Legal in General or BlackRock or Aviva, M&G, all these big houses that had a huge number of assets that we knew weren't getting sweated, to within an inch of its life. And so we would go and focus on the big houses. We would ask them if we can take on their most difficult, most challenging, most sort of neglected asset. And can we turn it around for them? And once we've done one of those, we'll take on another one. And we'll do it slowly and build a reputation. And that is exactly what happened. The outsourcing movement started a few years after we incorporated, actually. But we managed to land a few projects. We were on site meeting tenants, meeting the front of house, meeting the contractors daily or weekly. And we really, really cared about those assets. And we did exactly what we intended to do when we were looking after. Zach and I worked on one project together. That's how, sort of half a project each was how much detail we went into. And that was 12 years ago. And the DNA has not changed. That's exactly the approach from everyone that comes and works at E7. It is do more on less.
Yes, I'm smiling because, I can resonate with it so much. Like, these things are too important. Why not? Let's do them properly. And it's really interesting that you spend some time almost in your client avatar's shoes, in that role, knowing what their pain points are, knowing that they're stretched. Did that help you when you started going to speak to these people, saying, look, I've kind of been there, I know what challenges you face, maybe you're a bit spread, so therefore if there are a couple of things maybe you're not getting to, those are the ones we can take and make you look good at the same time? Did that help?
Yes, it did, albeit the beginning was a bit rocky, I must admit. We went in and pitched in the days of where we wore suits. We were suited and booted, right, let's go and pitch. We created our own video, presented it to all these fund managers and said, guys, look, we know your model's different to ours. Your model is lots of assets, balance fund, income producing. Ours is mainly development led, short income. How can we resolve issues? Should be a marriage made in heaven. because we can work for you on your tricky assets. You can drive value from your stabilized assets. And wouldn't that be fantastic? All the fund managers agreed it would be fantastic, but they all turned around and said, there's no chance you're having any of our business. We tell our investors we do this, so we can't be seen to be outsourcing to the likes of you guys, which was a bit of a shock. And we came out of a few meetings thinking, oh God, what have we done? We've got no business, but everyone agrees with us, but we can't unlock it. And then something amazing happened, is that we not only did we also bring in our other business partner, Matt Leach. He joined us a few months after we incorporated, so essentially a co-founder. He had a good number of relationships with some of the smaller funds, not necessarily the gargantuan M&Gs of the world, but the smaller sort of mid-tier fund managers who were absolutely stretched and saw the benefit in outsourcing. So there's a great guy. He's now at Hermes, a guy called Richard Peacock. He was at Kames at the time, which then became Aegon. And he spotted, yeah, okay, I can give these guys some projects. If they can really drive value, then their fees will be outweighed by the added value. So I'll take the risk. And he did. And we did drive value for him. And so we started small, small money managers, small portfolios, small assets. We drove value. We got the next one. We went through a bigger refurb. We did the next one. Oh, we've added some stories. Next thing you know, you're doing something pretty major. And it was a long-term relationship build. But the reason why we were able to, I guess, sell our services into those mid-tier managers was because we understood what the big guys were doing and how stretched everyone was, and it was exaggerated within these smaller managers. So yeah, it definitely gave us an advantage, but it wasn't easy. It was hard graft trying to convince pension funds that they should outsource to asset development managers. I mean, they wouldn't call us asset managers; it was just development managers at the time.
So you had to pivot a little bit, kiss a few frogs, work out where your niche sat, and I'm sure those first few meetings tested your confidence, your resilience, probably left you quite frustrated, I'd imagine, when you could see a problem that you can solve and actually a bit of politics or self-preservation are getting in the way. But it sounds like you pushed through and grown the business over the last 12 years, as you say, now not just doing workspace, but also into industrial, into living. What have been, if you were to release a, Ministry of Sound greatest hits collection for the last 10 to 12 years, Chris, what would be on there? What have you been most proud of? What have been your favorite moments?
Oh, there are there are lots. I mean, I guess helicopter view, my proudest moment is that we have a team of 18 people. We're not a huge business. We don't need to be huge. We will never be huge. We're lean for a reason, and that's most developer models. But the thing I'm most proud of is growing a business where you are offering a service or you are a provider where your product is in demand, and you've created a reputation where business comes into you as well as you pitching outwardly for business, which means you've created something that someone wants. And I don't think that should be underestimated, because it really is. I feel like we're solving a problem for people because these assets are sometimes stranded or struggling, and we have the ability to turn them around and create an income producing or high value product at the end. But building a business whereby it's been profitable for 12 years, we've done a huge number of transformations, and we're very proud of the legacy that we will leave behind, and the fact that we've left these buildings in a better condition than they were when we found them, especially from an ESG perspective. But I guess to answer your point specifically, that I've been so proud to be building a business that is in demand and working with some of the biggest names in real estate, and to add to that, we've also set up a brand new industrial business, just under 2 years ago now. That's from scratch. We had no seed assets, and we've now got a portfolio of 1 million square feet, 120 tenants, and our Manchester team are out there on the ground working these assets super hard. And then more recently, having launched our living platform, and now we're starting to develop single family terrace housing, which again we feel is addressing a problem. All of those three businesses are entirely separate under our group to remain specialists in those fields, but as a group, I guess we're a generalist. We share LPs and investors, we share ideas, we share processes, we share central services. But building all of that and it being profit making and in demand is the biggest buzz in the world, and I would encourage everybody to do it.
It's it's probably like another child, I guess, when you grow a business. I'm not going to ask you who your favorite client is or who your favorite team member is. I think that's probably a bit controversial and a bit unfair. But do you have a favorite project or a favorite building that you've worked on?
Yeah, I mean, on the office side, most of our business is in London now. We've got our portfolio is 1.9 billion, 1.5 is sitting in central London. So we're very heavily weighted, and we will only work in central London really in the office sector now, unless we're otherwise asked by existing investors. But the one that does stick in my mind is a really, really difficult asset. We bought 2 buildings on Thames Valley Business Park in Reading. Now, buying an office building in Reading a few days after COVID seems like a crazy idea. But we bought it with Beaumont, who are now M&G, and we bought them from Microsoft because it was the old Microsoft headquarters, and they downsized into a few buildings next door. We refurbished them. It was tough because of the pandemic, but we managed some great refurbishments. And I guess the reason why I'm telling you the story is because the proudest moment, or the icing on the cake, is that we've just let the building we refurbished back to Microsoft. So we bought the buildings from them because they didn't want them anymore. We repositioned them, and we created a product that would attract Microsoft's UK HQ. And they've come home and taken a long lease. And now we're in the process of selling the building. So it's not the sort of glamorous city tower, but it's a hell of a deal. And it's also fascinating to be able to take something that an occupier didn't want anymore and produce a product that's quality enough to attract them back.
That's an amazing story. Build it and they will come.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been easy. It's out of town. Reading market is not exactly sexy at the moment, but it's more around the nuances around that particular occupier. We didn't develop it with them in mind.
So it wasn't a build to suit in any way. It was more, we know that if we put it in the shop window, they could be a buyer.
Yeah, and they came back in, fell in love with how it had been transformed. They built the buildings in the first place, so it felt sort of almost like fate that they come home.
Telling them that what they did the first time around could be done better, but let us show you. And then them saying, well, actually, no, we agree.
Exactly.
Well, with the business, Chris, just touching on the kind of group structure and the move into other asset classes, what led that? Was it more meeting the right person, seeing an opportunity in the market? It sounds to me like a really clever play in terms of diversification, but also a chance to attract and retain high-performing talent, like giving people a chance to have maybe some ownership in different parts of the business, but the economies of scale of the mothership. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, you've covered a lot of them, but the real driver, I mean, I'm probably sharing too much now, but the real driver was that post-pandemic, if you were sat in the pub telling someone you're an office developer, there would be a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God, you're in the office sector. The office is dead. No one's ever coming back. I think Twitter came out and said they don't believe an office was required anymore, and that sent everyone into spiral. So obviously we were slightly nervous that the office sector was going to implode. But it didn't at the time, and we actually kept on growing. But it wasn't until a few years after the pandemic that we started to notice a little bit of a cool off from both occupiers and investors. And because we were heavily exposed to one type of investor, which was essentially the large pension funds. So if you were to look on our website and look at our partners page, you would see some great names, all the big names, big institutional names that you would be proud to work with. But what we realized is that we were heavily exposed to one form of capital. They were all chasing a similar sort of investor themselves, and that's a retail investor. So when times get tough, redemptions kick in, money starts going out instead of in. And when money starts going out instead of in, the first thing to cool off is development. These guys decide, well, why would we spend 50 million on this building when we've got redemptions coming through? We're better off selling the building and not having to spend the money. And so we saw what was happening and we had to react. So you're right, diversification was the main driver. We had to diversify in a number of different ways. Number one, type of investor. We realized just chasing the same pots of capital with the same money behind them was a silly idea. So we've diversified our investor base. Our LPs we work with are now family offices, high net worth, private equity, overseas capital, not just UK pension funds. We had to diverse geographically. We did a lot in the regions, and we focused very heavily on central London, where the demand was and the values were higher. And we had to diversify in terms of sector. And that's when industrial obviously has been the darling of the industry for a long time. I had a very good close friend of mine, Henry Bunting, that we used to work at DTRE, obviously a great investment house. And we've been talking about working together for a very long time. And Henry left DTRE. We set up V7 Industrial. We were focused very heavily on heavy lift asset management, development management, multi-let industrial estates. And we grew a book together with the help of his team, Howard and James, who've come over from Endurant. And so it was a diversification play, but also it's a different sort of process than we do on the office side. On the office side, we're very heavy capex, very heavy intervention, very heavy value add in terms of our approach. They're more asset management, light capex, very intense, people-based asset management. So lots of re-gears, lots of new lettings, light touch refurbishments, spending a lot of time with the assets. So it also diversified in terms of type of approach. So now we felt like after having the office and industrial businesses both up and running and profit making, we feel like we've got a nice balanced platform. But we did feel like we were still missing a limb, and that was the living side. And that's now our latest venture. And it's only a few months old. Got an amazing guy called Evan Reynolds who's joined us. And our plan there is very similar to the office side. It's to help reposition assets that are maybe no longer going to be used in their current use. So maybe edge of town offices where there's absolutely no demand for it anymore, and they get dropped and put new housing on there to fill the housing shortage. Or if it's not suitable for housing, it might be suitable for sheds. And that's where our industrial team can come in. So they weave nicely together. And with the three of those channels, we then have a beautifully diversified sector spread and risk spread and type of work spread, I guess. So yeah, it's all of the above to answer your question.
And I guess, yeah, it gives you a bit more holistic advice to the client as to what routes they might want to consider, picking up the learnings from each sector and where those bits overlap. That's all really interesting. I think, lots of businesses have been going through some thinking time. The market over the time that you've done it has experienced various different changes and events. some of which more permanent than others. As you mentioned, COVID, the office was dead until it wasn't. People still, funnily enough, like spending time together, as far as I can see. So that was kind of slightly short-lived, but it definitely had an impact on how people choose to work, how much time they spend there, and maybe made companies work a bit harder with their spaces to get people to come in and collaborate. So knowing a little bit more about the other parts now, having been on the journey with industrial, with living, what do you think makes a good development manager in today's market? And does that differ in terms of asset class? And do you think that's changed over the last 10, 15 years?
Well, it's interesting. A development manager, in inverted commas, means very different things to different people. You'll be amazed how many people call themselves development managers and don't really get involved in the whole development life cycle. They get involved in choosing grout colours and tiles and carpet choices, that kind of stuff. We don't do that. We are as detailed as a project manager. So our DMs are exposed to underwriting, all the numbers, managing the team, taking it through design, planning, construction, and lease up. So they are fully involved until it's fully let. If the building's not let, it's not a success in our view. So they have a very, very detailed approach. And I would say the first thing they've got to do is love buildings. They have to be passionate about buildings, and they need to be on site all the time. They need to understand where to drive value from these buildings, but essentially they still have to love transforming physical assets. Sitting behind a desk, working on a spreadsheet and choosing paint color online is not, in our world, not conducive of a successful development manager. So you've got to love buildings, you've got to love transforming them, but also overlaying the sort of doing the physical transformation of a building. They've also got to love the numbers, because viability, well, has never been as challenging in my career as it is now. So they have to understand the drivers and the levers they need to pull to maximize value. There's no point in having a development manager that's really good at creating a beautiful product, but actually the product has cost twice as much as it should have done and has made no money. We're not in it to create nice buildings just to look at. There needs to be nice buildings to look at, operate within, and make money. So I would say you need a balance. You've got to love real estate, you've got to love the transformation, you've got to understand the numbers. Ben White, who's one of our shareholders at V7, fantastic guy, started as an analyst with us, showed interest in asset management, did a lot of re-gears, drove through to light touch refurbs, turned around to us and said, I love refurbing buildings. Can I do it on a bigger scale? Over a number of years, turned himself into a development manager, and now looks after our DM team and is developing some of London's best known buildings. He's doing the Buckley building in Farringdon, for example, putting a new story on that, working on a number of assets on Regent Street, up in Fitzrovia, etc. And that's because he really understood the fundamentals behind what drives value. He loved buildings, and he ended up being head of a DM team.
I like how I used the analogy earlier about it being similar to running a business. I think that's kind of, you could have almost described the same thing. Running a development is a bit like running a business, a P&L, a project. You might have the greatest product, the greatest idea, but A, if no one knows about it, and B, if no one buys it at the end or leases it or becomes a customer, then it's probably not going to be that successful. So
Exactly.
Especially in a market like this, that's probably the marginal gain. And that's probably the hardest bit to tell for a client, is who's actually going to do the best job of that.
Yeah, I mean, marginal gains is interesting. So we try and find a marginal gain in everything. And because everyone has a broadly similar approach. If you're trying to buy a building, is the debt accurately modelled? Have we got the contingency coming out of the right period? in the capex model. Tiny little things, adding 1 or 2 bips on the IRR, hopefully combined, can be the difference between buying something and not. I'm not saying we're always top bidder, because sometimes pricing doesn't make sense, but when you are successful, it's because you've ended up spending a lot of time and detail on it, and it goes for running the business and for development. It's all linked.
Chris, knowing what you know now, having been on this journey, you might have touched on some of it with your last answer of the team and progressing and taking responsibility. What would your advice be to the younger you?
I would say, I mean, my approach is fairly fast. I would say to the younger me, be bold, make decisions fast and quick and with conviction, and crack on. I'm not saying you need to make them when they're uninformed, but for me, in my opinion, procrastination is a deal killer or a business killer. And you need the right information behind you to form your view and then make a decision. But procrastinating is going to get you nowhere. And it goes the same for your career. Oh, I'd love to start my business, but I don't know when's the right time. Oh, I couldn't possibly do it now. And then it just becomes excuse after excuse. And I was lucky. I didn't have any kids at the time. I had a very supportive wife. I thought I'll give it a go, but the decision was made fast. And so I would say my younger self, make them even faster, do more faster, with conviction. I think I would tell them not to, it's actually a bit contradictory to what I've just said, but I would say also make sure you have the attention to detail that these buildings and this business deserves. Because if you go in uninformed without knowing the detail and you shoot from the hip, it's sort of more of a gut feel, that's when you make catastrophic errors, which can easily blow up your business or your project. So I'd say detail and bold, quick decisions.
What's the SAS saying? Slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Exactly.
Make sure you get it right and then go.
Yeah, exactly.
So we sit here in the middle of 2026 or in August in the summer holidays, as we mentioned earlier. What excites you most about the market right now? Where do you see the biggest opportunities over the next 3 to 5 years?
I'll answer in all three sectors. So offices, we see value in the market in central London, very, very well located, multi-let core plus buildings. Our real focus on the investment side at the moment is to buy buildings that were built between, say, 2010 to 2020. Really good fundamentals, multi-let. And the reason why we like that is because you can get debt very easily on those buildings, and the debt market's super competitive. Occupiers are enjoying them because they're good fundamental buildings, but perhaps they haven't had a refresh, they haven't had any investment since they were built or refurbished. And we come in and we create beautiful spaces. We spend money where it counts. So receptions, end of journey, putting in amenity, degassing, central plant, really making a difference and spending the money where it counts. So we come in and proactively spend that money. The buildings are multi-let. Then the occupier, when they come up to lease event, has to say, actually, I do want to move because this building's not good enough for me anymore. But we've given them a really, really difficult decision. And there is very, very little supply in the market of good quality space. So it's a re-gear play on the core plus side. But I would say if you're buying well-located buildings that have got really good fundamentals that are just a little bit tired, that's a big play for us. On the industrial side, I would say this, but we're very heavily exposed to the multi-let industrial sector. We love buying unloved, heavily let, so very granular multi-let industrial estates that have got very good fundamentals, very similar to the office core plus strategy. It's where they've got good eaves height, big yards, but they haven't had any capex spent on the landscaping, signage, on amenity, on the buildings themselves. So go in. It's a heavy lift. Lots of asset management, lots of redecoration, degassing, EV charging, batteries, putting amenity on the park, that kind of stuff. And then lastly, on the living side, our particular focus is buying brownfield edge of town sites to build the new school version of Victorian terraced housing. So if you you go back in time, what's one sort of housing that's really worked very, very well for a very long time? And that is Victorian terrace housing. Everyone loves to live in a terraced house. So developing the new school version of that, which is slightly more dense, slightly smaller gardens, but a very big shared communal garden facility, swings, barbecues, playgrounds, that kind of stuff where kids play together. And it's occupied by families. You get sticky tenants, you create communities, and most importantly, it's a viable product because it's under 18 meters. You don't have gateway 2, you don't get stuck in planning like you do with very high-rise BTR. So those are the 3 areas that we're focusing on at the moment, and I think make a lot of sense.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and definitely lots to be excited about, trying to keep abreast of all of the opportunities, changes in those markets, competition, product. Sounds like a bit of a never-ending game, but you've got a strong team behind you to help you deliver those. We tend to wrap up the show, Chris, by both asking a question for the next guest, but also answering one from the guest before. So episode 9 was with Anna Strongman, who's the CEO of Oxford University Development. Talked a lot about some of the similar themes in that podcast in terms of placemaking and stakeholders, and working closely with L&G as an example. She asked you, and to preface this, real estate is obviously integral to the economy, but it's also a facilitator, an enabler, and a responder to levels of demand, be that in housing, commercial space, retail, restaurants, bars, industrial. With that in mind, and I'll let you choose the sector, what are the top 3 things you would do to stimulate demand?
To stimulate demand. Well, there's an obvious one. Forgive me if these are too obvious, but number 1 on the resi side has to be to get rid of stamp duty. I appreciate the new Prime Minister is trying hard to potentially bring one kind of taxation into resi real estate.
Yeah.
But I do think that stamp duty is an enormous blocker for movement and therefore transactions. And if there are any transactions happening, there's lawyers aren't being paid, removals companies aren't being paid, B&Q aren't earning money from new paint because no one's painting their new house. So I think in some shape or form, the removal of stamp duty would be fantastic to really ignite demand into the resi sector or the buy side. I would say on the commercial side, it's probably going over old ground, but I would say some form of streamlining of the planning process. We've found that, we hear all the time, councils are open for business, they're pro-development, but that's just not what we're seeing on the ground. We're even dealing with development corporations who are set up specifically to encourage development in certain areas, and we're getting pushback on certain sorts of schemes. So some kind of streamlining behind planning, making it quicker and, quite frankly, wider and easier. And then I guess the last way I would probably stimulate demand is the creation of more central activity zones, the CAS, formation of CASs, which are sort of a regen focus, but it's encouraging clustering of businesses, culture, leisure. You look at a town centre, an old school town centre, full of offices in an area called a CBD, don't have much living. You've got a high street. What you do have is separate zones. You don't have a bustling environment where you've got office workers buying sandwiches at lunchtime. You've got people that live there that are buying sandwiches or breakfast and dinner. You've got tourists and leisure guests being there through the day and through the night. So creating a true activity zone which is integrated in a town centre is my that's how I believe we could unlock demand and really pump growth. But again, the councils are so backward in their approach. No, you can't have resi in this area. It's predominantly an office area. No, integrate it. Make it feel like a 24-hour community. So yeah, I would say stamp duty, planning, and central activity zones.
Sounds pretty straightforward then. I'd also add on the office side, make it a bit more appealing, positive, and less friction and less cost to employ people. That would help too.
Absolutely.
Putting reasons in not to do it.
You could answer that question in loads of different ways in terms of taxation, couldn't you? You know, drop corporation tax, encourage new businesses to come into the UK. I mean, that's what Ireland did fantastically. And you look at the major corporations that are out in Dublin. I'm not saying we haven't got our own major corporations. We've obviously got them all in central London, but you know, reducing taxation on a corporate level would absolutely stimulate growth and bring new inbound occupiers our way.
Where would you start with those?
Well, it's got to be corporation tax, isn't it? Reduce corporation tax, and they will come. As if you make the corporation tax lower than your competing countries, you'll see an influx. It's what all the successful European cities have done recently, and look at their growth.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget as a UK PLC that we are competing for talent and capital against the rest of the world, and any barrier you put into that in terms of investment, people can do it elsewhere. It's not like we have anything necessarily, and we have a great legal system. We have really fair rules about how to do business. We've got some amazing places, but not like you can't get some of those things elsewhere. So sometimes maybe that gets lost a bit in translation. Thanks for answering that, Chris. I know that could be a whole podcast on its own to get into the detail of how you'd go about doing those, what budget you'd need, and how we could all vote for you. But in return for answering that question, would you like to leave on for the next guest?
Yeah, so I was really focusing on the investment market, and I think my question is that currently the majority of investors are lukewarm on deploying capital, I would say, unless you're in data centers or a very specific portion of the market. In general, investor appetite is lukewarm across the board. So I would say that's clearly partly market conditions, but it's also partly investor sentiment. So my question would be, what do you think needs to happen to change investor sentiment, to light a fire, to how can we convince investors that now is a buy time? Because values are low, rents are high, capex is stabilized. In our opinion, now is the time to be buying central London offices, for example. But investor sentiment is still low. Still like, no, we'll just wait, thanks. We may dip our toe, but we'll sit on the fence.
So moving them from an interested party to a committed one.
Yeah, how do you turn warm money into hot money?
It's a really big question, and I'm sure it's one that a lot of people are wrestling with right now. Probably going back to when you started the business, actually, going out and having these conversations. Does it bring back some of those memories where you can see an opportunity and you're trying to find a way to make it happen, and you're trying to work out what your angle is to tip people over the edge? Might sound a bit familiar. Yeah,
we really do think it's a buying opportunity over the next 18 to 24 months. But that doesn't align with the majority of investors' appetite. So if you find out, let me know.
I'll do my best. Have the pleasure of speaking to lots of people in this format and day to day. But Chris, thanks for spending time with us. I know you're super busy at the moment. I know we spoke off mic around summer holiday logistics. So thanks for jumping on. I'm sure the listeners have found your journey and lessons learned, and even just talking about how you've grown the business, engineered your career, had a plan. there's some real clear lessons in there. So thanks for sharing those. It's been a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to chat to you.
All right, catch you soon, Chris. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. Your support means the world. Please feel free to like, share, or pass the podcast on to a friend or colleague. Do drop me a line with any suggested topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes and recommendations of guests that you would love to see us interview. Till next time, go well.